Wichita Liberty TV, featuring host Bob Weeks. Local politics without the spin. Interviews with nationally respected economists. Hear directly from Kansas conservatives about what matters to you. It's individual liberty, limited government, and free markets. Wichita Liberty TV.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public affairs. We're broadcast on Great Plains Television, channel 26.1, also its companion website, kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me for my blog, The Voice for Liberty, at wichitaliberty.org. There, the motto is individual liberty, limited government, free markets, and economic freedom in Kansas and Wichita. If you'd like to learn more about the issues covered today or to contact me, well, just visit wichitaliberty.org, subscribe to the email newsletter, like Voice for Liberty on Facebook, follow me, Bob Weeks, on Twitter. Well, this week on Wichita Liberty TV, Rodney Wren teaches debate and forensics at Wichita Collegiate School. He appears regularly as a panelist on This Week in Kansas, which is broadcast on some other television station. Let's watch my conversation with Rodney Wren. Well, Rodney Wren, welcome to Wichita Liberty TV.
Good to be here.
So there was another Republican presidential candidate debate last week, and we are getting down to almost some serious decision time. This was the last debate for this calendar year. Coming up, we've got a Republican debate in South Carolina in the middle of January. Then on February 1st, Iowa caucus. So that's the first time that delegates will actually be awarded. February 6th, the Republican debate in New Hampshire, and then February 9th, New Hampshire primary. We've got South Carolina and a couple other states, but then on March 1st, Super Duper Tuesday, and about 45% of the delegates that are necessary to secure the nomination will be awarded that day. And then the Saturday after that, the Kansas caucus as well, which people, I think, are very interested in as well. So what's your assessment, Rodney? First of all, I want to say, as libertarian, I have a particular fondness for Rand Paul, although his campaign doesn't seem to be going very well. But you know what they say in Kentucky, Rand's home state?
No.
They say he may not win, but at least he ran.
Sure.
And I know that you've been supporting.
Well done.
You've been supporting Dr. Ben Carson,
Right.
and his campaign is unfortunately, I guess, going in the wrong way as well. So, what's your take on the race now? Who's really in it for the duration, and who perhaps maybe should be looking to step down as Lindsey Graham did this week?
Right. Certainly, I think what's just fascinating, but it speaks to, as I think pretty much every political commentator has recognized, is this, that Trump just continues to maintain and, depending on the poll, grow. I mean, earlier a lot of people thought, he represents about a third maybe of Republican primary voters who are just angry and are just fed up and just want someone who's going to be brusque. And now, depending on the poll, he's growing to 40%. And it's shocking.
It's so amazing because people, I think one of his big first things he did was made fun of John McCain for getting shot down over Vietnam.
Right. And
people say, he'll never survive that. And almost every week there's something like that, and none of it seems to stick to him.
And it's almost, I'm reminded of 2008. I was a big fan of Fred Thompson, and at the time, everyone thought Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee, and I personally just kind of liked that picture, that tough Fred Thompson against Hillary or against Barack Obama. I think that's where a lot of Republican primary voters are at right now. They want someone who's just going to take it to Hillary and just be meaner than snot and not care. And again, all the conventional wisdom out the window, completely out the window. Every time a professional pundit, the establishment, everything they thought as far as how a campaign was supposed to be run, they're wrong. Now, the exception to that is Cruz, Senator Cruz, has been growing, and I think, quite frankly, it's probably the Ben Carson supporters who like Ben Carson for his evangelical views are just turning to someone with more experience, quite frankly, who has been able to kind of balance being an elected official in Washington, D.C., but also being plenty brusque in a much more professional way than Donald Trump. So,
and Ted Cruz, in recent polls, he has urged above Trump in Iowa.
Right. And Iowa is going to be... the evangelicals always seem to do much better in Iowa. Rick Santorum winning there, Mike Huckabee winning there, right. So it would not be shocking to me. And my wish / hope is that when it comes time for the caucus goers in Iowa, who it's not a secret ballot. They stand in a room, and you have to go stand in a corner. Right. When it comes time for people to actually visibly say they're going to support Donald Trump, I'm not so sure so many people are going to do that. And you can politic. And so there's some action, you can work the crowd in the room.
There's the viability threshold, too, where if candidate A only has a couple, 2 or 3%, then he's declared non-viable, and those candidates go choose another one.
Right.
That's always been kind of some conventional wisdom, that when people get in the voting booth and have to pull the lever for Donald Trump, that they'll think twice about that. Do I really want this man to be president? But now you start to see some pundits saying that in the polls, Trump's support may actually be understated, that people are shy of telling a live pollster that they really prefer Donald Trump. So those people at least believe that his support is understated.
But that's dependent on a poll being done by a live pollster. There's push polls that can be done. And I don't know the methodology of all the different polls. And I'll also say this, and we were privy to this last year here in Kansas. The polls were not accurate seemingly at all, at least in Kansas. So part of me wonders what these how accurate these polls are going to be because of an issue like that, because of who's actually being polled, even though they try to get the balances to a certain
this whole issue of going from landlines to cell phones, the landslide to that way is really causing troubles too, I think. I think at Packeter Club we want to have Chapman Rackaway, our friend from Fort Hays State, political science professor, come and talk to us about the difficulties in polling, because it really is difficult sometimes to do that. So before we take a break, do we really need to bother with the Democrats? I mean, that seems to be pretty much foregone conclusion that Hillary's going to be the nominee there.
It is. Bernie's pulling her to the left, except for maybe on guns. But that's the point of Bernie. And for Hillary, it was good for her to have a nomination fight so that she had to put people in place for the general election. A coronation would have probably hurt her come the general election. But yeah, I think without a doubt that's a foregone conclusion.
And I guess the only big thing is if there were actually a criminal complaint filed against her for the emails or something like that. So that would be a big, really throw a monkey wrench over into there. And there's all sorts of talk that they'd be looking at Joe Biden, or who knows what could happen over there. So hold on to those thoughts for a moment. We're going to take a moment off for a commercial break. This is Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, Rodney Wren. So, Rodney, one of the ongoing themes in reporting the Republican campaign is this idea of there's the Republican, the establishment candidates, and then there's other people. I guess the opposite of establishment is probably Tea Party. That's kind of at least different than that.
Right.
So, and we all pretty much know who the candidates are. The establishment candidate, Jeb Bush, and now they say Marco Rubio's kind of inheriting that role. But besides them, who are the Republican establishment? Just what is the Republican establishment, and why do so many people not like him?
I think if you asked 10 professional commentators, you'd probably get 7 to 10 different answers on the establishment. Kind of as a caricature, You think about the old party bosses in the back room, the smoke-filled room with the cigar, making the various decisions.
Right.
Would be kind of who the establishment is. I think it also depends on each state. It depends kind of nationally. In Kansas, the Republican establishment, the party bosses, if you want to call them that, are probably much farther to the right than nationally. Nationally is much more concerned, you would think, with trying to coalesce some kind of majority, whether it be in the House or the Senate, certainly the White House. It's probably the people with a lot of money.
The donor class.
Right, the donor class.
And that's what was always thought to be Jeb Bush's appeal,
Right.
that he was tuned into the donors,
Right.
and he did raise a tremendous amount of money, I believe.
And you would think, if he has the money to get to Super Tuesday, certainly one or two, maybe three people should get some momentum out of Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, to maybe enable them to go into Super Tuesday, keep and / quickly put in some ground game into those Super Tuesday states. But I just don't see Jeb Bush coming in the top three in any of those, quite frankly.
He seems to be fading, if
Right,
anything.
right, and he's grasping at straws and just he's now getting brash, trying to make a name, taking on Donald Trump, whereas Marco Rubio just looks and sounds much more like an established candidate who, kind of a policy wonk, but clearly is not a Bush and just doesn't have all the baggage that comes with Jeb Bush.
But he's definitely not an outsider. He worked his way up to the speakership of the House of Representatives in Florida,
Right.
and has served a full term almost in the United States Senate. So,
Right. But at the same time, then it, and this is where it all gets fun, I guess, for those of us that enjoy it. He became part of the establishment, if you will, on his immigration plan, that
The
Gang of Eight,
right.
and seeking a pathway to citizenship.
Serving with John McCain,
Right.
who I think would be
Very
a card-carrying member of the
Right.
Republican establishment.
Right,
no doubt.
exactly. So
Mitt Romney, too, probably. And
to some extent, I think the easiest synonym for the Republican establishment would be much more of a moderate Republican who is really just trying to make sure that Republicans can win.
Okay.
Regardless of the Republican, they just want a Republican who can win. And probably pays homage to or fealty to the Republican Party no matter what. You think of Frank Underwood in House of Cards, even although he's a Democrat in that show. It's that kind of just you toe the line and you're not going to break off. But then depending on the issue, there's going to be schisms, so it's hard to pinpoint in every instance.
Yeah, well, we certainly have some of that going on in Kansas too.
Absolutely.
As well. But Donald Trump, I think if people want to get kind of a sense of him, in 2011, have you ever seen the Comedy Central roasts that are at the Friars Club in New York, the celebrity roast?
I've never watched one. I've seen commercials and things.
In 2011, he was the roastee. Now,
Okay.
these are, and the roasters talked about his potential presidential campaign in 2012 because he did dangle that out, at least as a possibility. Now, these roasts are, Rodney, I'm embarrassed to admit that I understand, I think, almost all the jokes that they're telling. They are some very saucy, salty jokes about Donald Trump. And they're making fun of his sex life and all sorts of things like this. Well, first of all, Donald Trump knew that was, he obviously knew that was going to be what was going to be happening in these roasts. But jokes are funny because they have a whiff of plausibility, a whiff of truth to them. If you made fun of Donald Trump, if you called him a short man or something like that, that wouldn't be funny at all because he's pretty tall.
Right.
But when you make jokes about his sex life and his young wives and all the supermodels he's dated and so forth like that, it's funny because it's true, really. So I just think when people, and also Trump has insulted Charles Krauthammer and Steve Hayes of Fox News, and I think for most Republicans, Fox News is something they like and appreciate. So it doesn't seem like insulting and making fun of Fox News is a very wise strategy for cultivating Republican voters.
But I think that's part of his thing is he doesn't care. He's a shtick. It goes back to the old adage that any press is good press. I mean, I guess just the conventional wisdom's been thrown out as far as that's concerned. At the same time, you take someone like Mark Levin. Mark Levin is very hard on Fox News and on a number of pundits who appear regularly on Fox News. So again, but I think you take those type of, Mark Levin's a very angry radio show host.
Not a member of the establishment.
Right. He yells a lot. So I think a lot of those same type of folks who love the Mark Levin show, who might think that Fox News, while they appreciate it, isn't as right-wing as it should be, maybe. Those are the same kind of people that are probably going to be drawn to that Donald Trump candidacy. And again, they don't care about anything else except that the Donald is going to take it to Hillary Clinton, and that's all they're blinded by that. And it's shocking that that's where we are.
Yeah. Hold on to that idea. I want to follow up on that in just a minute. So let's take another moment off from the Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks, and with me this week, Rodney Wren. Speaking about, we talked about money a moment ago, that Jeb Bush had success in raising a lot of money. You know who has not spent much money is Donald Trump.
Right.
He's able through Twitter and other media appearances to make himself the center of attention with spending very little money. I imagine he has that real big airplane he flies around, but other than that, he's really not spending a lot of money, I don't think.
No, but he's also banking on his name. I think early on that was my explanation for Donald Trump, was that Donald Trump had the name recognition for a lot of Republican primary goers. Unless you were you paid a lot of attention, you didn't know who Rand Paul was, or Marco Rubio, or Ted Cruz, or George. Ben Carson. You just didn't know these names, but you knew Donald Trump. And he's made it quite clear that he's not accepting any PAC money. He's going to spend his own money. But yeah, again, it's shocking. He's just not doing hardly anything other than just being brash. And it was very interesting. And this is this is what's most frustrating for, I think, people like you and I. I watched the interview that he did this past Sunday morning. He was on NBC's Meet the Press. He was on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. First off, way tougher questions for him by both of those guys than Bernie Sanders. Number two, Donald Trump said nothing. He just said it angrily. And it is mind-numbing listening to him and thinking that somehow he's their first choice. Yeah. It's like, what? I don't even know what analogy there is other than, the Teddy Roosevelt Bull Moose party back in 1912, just anger and fire and brimstone, and that's what we have now. But
he's really running. You think about it, most of the time when he's on TV, he's able to phone into these Sunday morning shows.
Right.
They almost always require their guests to come into the studio. So for Donald Trump, they're willing to take even a phone call. Yeah. And it's really amazing that he's able to do that. I saw he was on the Bill O'Reilly show, the O'Reilly Factor on Fox News, very popular show amongst conservatives and Republicans. And Bill O'Reilly was kind of, in some ways, excusing some of this over-the-top rhetoric and statements by Donald Trump, saying, well, he knows he really can't do that, such as deporting the 12 million or whatever illegal immigrants. He's just saying that in order to get elected. And I thought, what? And I think Charles Krauthammer came up and criticized Bill O'Reilly for, well, we can't just excuse politicians who will say anything to get elected, even though they don't think they can actually do what they're promising to do.
Whether it's O'Reilly or Sean Hannity or anybody that has the Donald on, giving him a pass because he might seem to agree with what they want is inexcusable. It should be the Hugh Hewitt on the CNN debates. It should be whoever Fox News has moderating their debates that are calling him out and are pushing for substance. I just don't see them allowing who I would call the legitimate candidates from not trying to or trying to answer these questions with just buzzwords and anger and brimstone and nothing, literally nothing substantively. I mean, they're pushing Dr. Carson harder to try to get substance out of Dr. Carson than they are Donald Trump, and maybe they just know they can't get it out of the Donald. I don't know, but I mean, Megyn Kelly, he went after Megyn Kelly for Megyn Kelly trying to push him in the very first debate. And it worked
in a very crude way.
Yeah,
too.
and it
That's
worked
the type
for
of
him.
Thing you think that would finish off a candidate,
Right.
and it would for a lot of candidates, but not for the Donald. Well, let me ask you this, Rodney: do you see any way that Donald Trump will not be the nominee of the Republican Party? Any scenario where he stumbles in some way, or someone else comes and overtakes him and?
I don't think stumble, but I mean, for a couple of months now, people have been talking about the Ted Cruz long game, and the polls are now, I think, showing him coming up, Dr. Carson going down, and I love Dr. Carson for a lot of reasons, and I think Dr. Carson supporters like the man. I have some other highly sophisticated reasons, which we can explore possibly as far as why I think he'd be a good candidate nonetheless. But I think Ted Cruz probably is the best alternative to Donald Trump. And I think Ted Cruz would offer a legitimate dialogue as well as pushing Hillary Clinton. I honestly think that Donald Trump supporters think he's going to call Hillary the B word on national television or something quite offensive, and he just doesn't care because his poll numbers show that nobody cares when he says those kind of things. Right. But I think a Ted Cruz would be passionate, would be policy oriented, would be able to do a lot of things against Hillary Clinton that just wouldn't look as sophomoric as Donald Trump. And as of right now, today, December 22nd, I think Ted Cruz probably is the best candidate, and I know we're making our friend Andy Hoosier very happy by saying this, but I think that is probably the best alternative to the Donald.
Well, Rodney, in about the minute we have left, our United States Congressman Mike Pompeo came out maybe about a month ago or so in favor of Marco Rubio, which seemed to be pretty early on in picking someone. Do you think that was a wise move on his part, or?
I know Mike well. I like him. I think he's a great man. I think he's a great representative for Kansas and for the 4th District. I just happen to disagree with him on his choice. I think Mike has a vision, and coming from his business background, he looks at things through that lens, and he's trying to see what's best for the Republican Party, what can work for the Republican Party, how can we move in a direction that is clearly center-right, but is not establishment, maybe might not be as far-right as some people like.
I'm just glad he didn't come out for Donald Trump.
I don't think, it'll be shot. Has anybody come out for Donald Trump in the elected class?
I don't know, but I was very relieved earlier this summer when Charles and David Koch, when it was clear that they were not supporting Trump and would look elsewhere. And they've not yet really supported anybody either. So, well, Rodney, we're out of time. So thank you very much for appearing on Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. That's all for this week. We'll see you next week, and have a happy holiday.